Hello and welcome to the Leaders in Supply Chain and Logistics podcast. I'm your host, Radu Palamariu, Group CEO of Elpid Global. Our mission is to connect the supply chain ecosystem by bringing forward some of the most interesting leaders in the industry. And I'm delighted to have with us today Brian Nemeth, Managing Director at AlixPartners, where he leads large-scale transformations and turnarounds for some of the world's most complex supply chains. He has over 20 years of experience across industries like automotive, aerospace, heavy manufacturing, and logistics, and he is the go-to advisor when companies hit turbulence and need to move fast. He's known to combine deep operations expertise with sharp focus on execution to drive results that stick. And as many of you know, AlixPartners is a global consulting firm that specializes actually in urgent high-impact situations when it really matters, whether it's a turnaround, transformation, or navigating disruption that we have a lot these days. They work side by side with business leaders to deliver results under pressure. Offices in 20 countries, deep expertise across industries. AlixPartners is known for rolling up their sleeves and getting it done, not just recommending slides, but really driving outcomes. So it's my pleasure to have Brian today with us, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Radu. Looking forward to the conversation today.
And we agreed that we would talk about the topic most interesting, hot, and troubling and headache giving in supply chain for a while now, which is tariffs. And there's been all sorts of discussions and all sorts of updates as early as a couple of days ago. We don't know what will happen next, but maybe let's start first with what happened in the past, because we've seen tariffs in the past. So let's start there and then draw a conclusion to what could happen next in the future. So what happened last time there were tariffs? How did the company tackle that? And let's look there.
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think the one adjective to describe what's going on is dynamic. Even yesterday, additional news comes out on the reduction on the Chinese tariff side. So one of the things that we've done from the AlixPartner side is look at how the past kind of informs the future. And so when we look at what happened in that 2017, 2018 period, there were tariffs, single country tariffs, which leads to just country hopping, right? So if you put a tariff on China, then people moved manufacturing and production to Vietnam or Southeast Asia. And that's where you saw the increase. But there's one unique case study around washing machines where basically everybody received the tariffs. So it was really driving manufacturing to the US in this example. And so about 20 to 50% tariffs on washing machines, or most washing machines. And so what happened was you basically had roughly $2 billion worth of imports in 2017. 2018, that dropped to 1.3 billion. And then what happened was the tariff eventually it expired in 2023. So the last year before the tariff, it was still in the 1.6 billion range. Immediately after, it popped right back on its old trajectory, went to 2.2 billion in 2023. So basically, the tariff did drive the behavior that it was expected to drive. The imports dropped significantly. Large companies, LG, Samsung, they switched production to the United States, and they were able to produce in the United States. The pricing went up, and it went up more than inflation. So I think roughly the first year, the pricing went up about 12% or so. But they were able to drive that behavior, right? The manufacturing occurred. But the second the tariffs went away, all the companies almost immediately went back to their old manufacturing locations. And immediately, basically, it kind of stayed on the same trajectory it would have went if it would have went from 17, 18, 19, 20. If you think about kind of what the growth would have been, and it went right back on track. And then what also occurred is the pricing immediately drops. We were looking at what happened to appliances during that time period. I think inflation was in the 2 to 3% range, but general appliances were down 5%. But guess what? Washing machines were down almost 11%. And so actually at the end of the period, if you go to 24, basically, the pricing is exactly the same as all the other appliances. It came back. But during that tariff period, price was significantly increased, but the manufacturing occurred in the United States. So it's a good case study to see that, if you don't have a long-term view on that tariff staying there, right, then what types of actions do you take, right? It costs a lot of money to create a manufacturing plant or move a manufacturing plant from point A to point B.
Is there something different this time around?
This time around was the sure kind of global asset. It just impacted everything, every industry, every country, right? So I think that, the scope of it was much larger, the speed of it, and it wasn't as telegraphed. I think it took people by surprise on how quickly and how large some of the tariffs were.
Mm-mm. That for sure. And what do you see as the reaction of your clients? How are they coping now? And still, it's a bit of a limbo because it's not resolved. Yeah, but what do you see as early behaviors?
So we're seeing, a pretty large range, right? You're seeing a decent amount of people that are literally just playing the wait and see. Hey, what are my competitors doing? You know, should I just sit back and let this kind of settle a little bit, or should I be taking action now, right? So I think there's an element of that. But then there were very quickly it switched to kind of what should I do in the short term? Are there actions I could take immediately? And so that's where we started seeing some behaviors that, as supply chain experts, we see like the bullwhip effect, right? You see all these companies, oh, how do I bring cargo forward? Do I move stuff air freight? Do I start to kind of build up inventory until I have a better view of what's going on? So I think the initial reactions were around that, is how do I bring in inventory ASAP until I have a better feel for what's going on? And a lot of companies were saying, hey, if I haven't made a resilient kind of risk adverse supply chain, back in the 2017-18 period, or during that China plus one strategy period, then what do I do at this moment in time?
And like you said, I mean, the big announcement was with the China and US, and now it's been significantly reduced. Yeah, I think it's 30% on Chinese goods, and the Chinese are kept 10% on US goods. I hope I'm not misspeaking. Still, like, because there's also an element of first mover, and there's some advantages. At the same time, there's also disadvantages that you can make the wrong moves. And it also feels a little bit like, and we're gonna get this for another 3 years and a half at least, or it's my opinion. It's not a fact, but subjective personal opinion. This administration is not to necessarily be trusted for taking a very long term or sustained view on things. I mean, there's changes from one week to the next. So it becomes almost like the new norm is prepare for the unexpected daily, right? So what do you do? Yeah, you're a chief supply chain officer, chief operations officer. How do you even think about this?
Yeah. So I think there's a few things, right? And this is kind of a long question to unpack, right? There's the what do you do? How do you react to this news of yesterday? Which I think this is great for supply chain professionals who took ops courses during their MBAs or undergrad, right? The bullwhip effect in the beer game, if you remember those games, right, where everyone in the supply chain couldn't talk and the demand signal kind of was given, and it basically remained the same and changed once. We're going to see this all play out in full effect. I think that announcement yesterday, I'm sure the container shipping lines were very happy to hear that the tariffs reduced, because now basically all those ships, all those orders are going to there's going to be a huge rush in the next 90 days to bring all this freight in. And so I think you're going to see air freight and ocean freight. They're going to go potentially crazy again. I could see the spot market skyrocketing, everyone trying to bring volume in ASAP. And then you're going to have similar effects to what happened to COVID, right? You're going to have this huge congestion at the origin ports, which is going to create huge congestion at the destination ports, which is going to create equipment shortages at the destination locations. And it's going to kind of, move up and downstream again. And we're going to see this is what I mean by the bullwhip effects. So it's all going to come. And then 90 days after, if there's no deal, then it's going to stop again and reset, right? And so I think that understanding kind of that these things are going to occur, and excessive communication. And I think there's a lot of learnings from the tariff time period that the supply chain officers and supply chain managers can kind of take into account of extra communication. Hey, this is a huge risk. This is potentially happening. Prioritize the purchase orders you want on the ship. Prioritize the purchase orders that we can afford to air freight. Let's take advantage right now that the tariffs are reduced. A lot of companies were bringing product into bond. And so for those who don't know what exactly that means, right? You could bring your product in to North America physically, but it hasn't entered the United States because it hasn't cleared customs, right? And so all the bonded facilities probably in the United States right now probably
in
have an
full.
excess amount of inventory, and they're
Yeah.
all probably about to release it and go, I'm going to take the 30% because I don't know what's going to happen in 90 days. And so you went from probably a lack of bonded facilities. Now the bonded facilities are probably going to have a bunch of supply. It's going to flow to the warehouse. But then you have people potentially looking to bring some of the product coming in bond, right? And so you have all these little levers and different aspects to take into account. But I think the most, if there's just one takeaway from this, it's communicate, 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 because I think executives have a much better understanding because of COVID about what could happen, right, as a result of all the cost increases and congestion. But I think it just requires constant communication. Hey, there's a lot of concern. We went from
Yes.
ships being canceled to now all of a sudden where it's going to be very difficult for us to even get a booking. And oh, by the way, it might be hard for us to get what used to take 2 days to get our container out of the port, might take a week or two. And I think if you can do that now, you start to prepare people and you allow people to make decisions. Like one of the things we did or are doing with clients is setting up a tariff war room. And what that means is just getting everybody on the same page on the implications, right? What does it mean for our cost of goods? What does it mean for our inventory on hand? What's the total cost of ownership and how does that link to the bill of materials? And basically getting all the functions together. And so
Mm.
everyone understands the implications. So there's no surprises. And so this alone is, it sounds so simple on the surface, right? Like everyone should just be aligned on the implications. But the reality of that is it can be hard to do. And especially when you're doing it cross-functional with different areas of knowledge and expertise. But this is an area where, we've seen that there's a lot of value to be added on this piece.
Yeah. No, I mean, for sure. And I'm nowhere close to your level of experience. And but the common complaint that I hear from chief supply chain officers and chief operations officers is, well, the CEO and the board doesn't understand supply chain. They don't understand the implications. They, they don't understand how X connects to Y, and they haven't played the beer game. They don't. They might have drank beer, but they didn't play the beer game, so they don't understand the implication of bullwhip and all of that, those good stuff. And I'm almost, maybe back to where we started with the washing machine example that you gave. How do you think it's going to play out this time? I mean, we're reading the crystal ball because nobody knows, but what's your take, Brian?
I think there's gonna be this volatility. I think that if you look at the reaction to the tariffs, it's creating another reaction or a counter reaction, right? And so good or bad, it's having an effect. And so what I think will happen is they'll keep popping up until they no longer have an effect. And
Mm,
so what it leads to is you just have to be nimble and extra communicative, right? Like, okay, it's 30% today, but what happens in 90 days if they don't solve something and it goes up to about 100? What are you going to do? Right. And I think this scenario planning is another aspect of this. As supply chain managers, we have to do that all the time, right? What happens if the vessel's a week late? What happens if our vendor doesn't deliver on time? What happens if the vendor only delivers, 80% of the order instead of 100%? You need to kind of have this scenario planning in the back of your head. And again, it's constant communication. Right? If I was a chief supply chain officer today, I'd say, assuming we get space, this is how much inventory we are going to be able to bring in the next 90 days. We know what the tariff's going to be in the next 90 days. Is the goal then from the executive team to bring in as much inventory as humanly possible? Or do we want to kind of dollar cost average and bring in some and then wait and see what the outcome is? Because what happens if it goes to 20%? It could go down or it could then go back up, right? And so you just don't know. And so again, it comes down to communication and telling your fellow functions and executives, this is what I'm able to do. And you now have to tell me kind of tactically how you want me to execute off that.
I'm just simplistically, right? So, and I might be wrong, and I might be oversimplifying. China has done, has just created ecosystems, manufacturing ecosystems like nobody else, right? So clearly there's been some decoupling, or there's been, some things happen in Vietnam, some things moved to, but India, there's Apple moved, I don't know what, in India. Most of those components anyways come from China and are just assembled in India. So in reality, I don't see how China's role as the world's factory is going anywhere Nobody can challenge that, and it takes time to put a factory, and skill and expertise and investment to put a factory in US. I just don't see how that is going to happen. So irrespective almost of like, how are you going to bring back manufacturing jobs in the US? Is like, to me it seems utopic, like unless you want to put robots and automate fully almost the factories, and even that takes a while. I mean, it takes 1, 2, 3, 4 years if you're good. Yeah, how are we going to do that, right? So to me it seems like inevitable that we're going to stick more or less, back to the scenario with the washing machines. You're going to pay more as long as the tariffs are there, and then once the tariffs are out, you just go back to, or am I wrong, or am I oversimplifying? Love your view.
No, I actually think you're right. It's always going to end up going to the most cost effective solution, and I think there are certain aspects. That's another finding from that 2017-18. There were tariffs put on toys, and if you look where toys are manufactured, it's actually, that's in the news even now, right? You just heard this
Yes.
thing about the dolls and all this other stuff. Tariff on toys. I think I might not be exact on these numbers, but order of magnitude, I'm there. I think China had like 99% of the toys that were imported in the US. In 18, they put the tariffs on. To this day, I think it's now they have 97%. And Vietnam went up a lot, right? So even with the tariffs, the expertise, the capability, it still makes sense, right? The price goes up, but there's still not a better place or a better option at the moment. And so China still has its kind of role to play. So I agree. I think one of the things I've been hearing is this: it was China plus one, now it's China plus two. So now it's diversifying where you source from and making sure you have additional options. I think the other thing that's come out of this is a lot of our customers are asking to go further and further up and downstream. They want to say, okay, I understand, and I think in the automotive industry, like they have a better understanding of this, but in other, like if you do apparel, it's like, oh, where did the cotton come from, or where did the raw materials come from? So they're going further back in the supply chain to try to understand kind of how dependent they are on certain countries, certain locations, and do they need to make partnerships with those suppliers, or do they need to diversify that base? Like, hey, can that raw material only come from China, or can it also come from Bangladesh or whatever the place may be? And to answer your that part about the U.S., it's interesting. We have a very strong manufacturing team as part of our overall operations practice. And one of the things that we're being asked is a lot about automation, right? So it wasn't about bringing necessarily jobs or different jobs, right? You're going to need engineers instead of kind of the traditional factory labor, because the people who have been reaching out to us saying, hey, we want to potentially, start a plant in the US, kind of how, what can we automate and what needs to be done manually? And if you create automation, then again, you need high education engineers and technicians to be able to maintain and tweak and operate the robots and the automation appropriately.
But therein lies the fundamental issue, and as you know, I've been living in Asia for a long time. I speak to executives, almost all, I dare say, CEOs, CSCOs, CEOs that I talked of global multinationals. I mean, when I ask them what's your best run operation, they say China. Like,
Yep.
okay, maybe not all, but a lot of them say that. From operations, manufacturing, best advanced factories, just the work ethic, you name it, creativity, innovation, constant and relentless pursuit of getting and doing better. You go to China, if you've been there recently, I mean, people say it's 5 years ahead of, is living in the future now.
Yep.
I just don't see, and I'm European, I'm Western. I mean, I'm clearly, I mean, it's taken me a while to appreciate the Asian style, the Chinese style for sure. But I'm struggling with how do you even compete with that, Brian? They are the number one. They installed more industrial robots last year than the whole world combined, right? I looked at some data.
No.
It's more industrial robots that have been installed in China than all the world, all countries of the whole world. How can you get to a point where it's even feasible to think you can catch up?
It might not be a matter of catching up, right? Obviously, the tariffs are a tool that's making it uncompetitive, right? And me now sitting in Europe, right, moving from the US, sitting in Copenhagen, I'm looking at this and going, now the tariff percentages changed, but let's say it stayed, there would be all these suppliers in China with all this product. Where is it going to go? I assume the first people you called out was Western European consumption, and you go, hey, I have all this great inventory. I'm willing to offer you discount and send it to you. And then what happens, right? Then the EU potentially goes, well, maybe there's an anti-dumping, and then you kind of run out of places to go. So I think that's the alternatives are, one is it is the best, but people get afraid of that. And so they look for alternatives. And when they look for alternatives, then what it leaves, I think, a country like China is, and you're already seeing it, is they go to Southeast Asia, they go to other countries, they apply that technology, and they kind of just lever it in other locations and still find ways to take advantage of it. I think when I worked in Vietnam with Maersk, in 2004, 5, 6 time period, right? They basically, I think it was Taiwanese owners of Chinese factories recreating their Chinese factories in Vietnam and bringing their Chinese workers to Vietnam to train the Vietnamese workers, right? So you have this transfer of knowledge, and even now you're hearing about factories full.
Yes,
full factories.
Northern Vietnam is full of
and they're being moved even to like Mexico. So you're here saying Factory X was here. It's going to take us 18 months. We're going to move literally the whole factory and teach the people how to do the work over in location X. So I think what you'll start to see is that type of thing. Like if they can't find a way to get it out and it's better than everything else out there, they'll find other ways, right? If it's not direct, they'll find other ways to take advantage of the technology they've created.
Yeah. What does it all mean with the tariffs for companies that are not US centric in their trade?
Yeah, it's been, again, a big question for me sitting in Europe. A lot of them, a lot of the European companies that have probably like less than 30% exposure to the US in revenue or profit or whatever it is, most of them are saying the wait and see method, right? They're just saying, I'm going to watch what my competitors do. Some of them front run some inventory to make sure they got it over. Some of them are saying we have enough inventory, we'll kind of wait it out. So I think in the short term, they're basically going to kind of play this wait and see method, which to me makes sense. If you're not overly indexed to the US, you're careful on what you're bringing into the US. And it goes back to my last comment about like this potential, hey, Europe, look at all this product I have. I would be very opportunistic the other way if I'm a European-based company to say, hey, I'm already sourcing a little out of China out of this. How do I front run and take advantage of a really low, maybe run on my product and take advantage of a low cost opportunity, right? It's kind of seizing the moment to take advantage of it in some form or way.
Yes. No, definitely a lot of a lot of wait and see. I think it's almost the whole market is kind of holding its breath, and also by the way, investments in the US have stalled. I know a couple of companies that have publicly declared astronomical to some extent amounts of investment in the US, and then let's say that they're European companies, and then a prime minister or president said, hey, look, let's see first what happens with the tariffs, and then you go ahead with your investment or not. I actually, I'm not going to name it, but there's a few cases like that. So I think it's just stalled everything, and or a lot of different projects. Unless you're really, really sure that it's going to make sense in 5 years, you don't do it for now.
Yeah. Well, we talked about something, we previously spoke. If in 2017 and 18, you built kind of your own resilient supply chain and you took this seriously, right? You're well positioned in the current environment, right? If you have, duplicative manufacturing in multiple geographies, right? You can flex up and down and handle these things. And so maybe one of the outcomes of this instability or uncertainty is supply chain managers, which have probably struggled to get funding for their ideas because executives historically thought it was a luxury. Maybe this is another moment in time where they can polish off or dust off that business plan and say, hey, maybe we should do things a little bit different because the world keeps changing at a rapid pace. We got burned once. We're now getting burned twice. This plan, I think, is still very valid because if we had it, we wouldn't have burned the second time. So maybe it's time to revisit it, right? And so I think that's another thing that we're trying to get on the radar of our customers is if you're a healthy company, because that's the other thing we didn't talk about. There's some companies that literally this is like a a huge blow, right? That
Yeah.
uppercut in boxing that shell shocks you, right?
Yeah.
Like for some of them, like they're moving to cash preservation, very different. But other companies are like, oh, I used to make 25% EBIT and now I'm going to make 18 or whatever. Those types of companies might look at it and say, we're fortunate enough, we have capital. Let's think through and let's make sure we're not exposed again, so we don't have to run this fire drill again. And so I think we're looking for those types of companies as well to say, this is a multi-year journey to build up the resiliency. But once you have it, when these things pop up, we're able to say, it's okay. We built a model that allows us to have the flexibility to handle this, and we know the implications to our business.
Yeah. Final question for me, Brian. A recession. Do you see this impacting in any way? We haven't had one proper one since 2008. Do you see this triggering or already some potential early signs, or some because let's take toys. Yeah, if you were, most of the companies that sell toys are not necessarily Toys R Us size of multi-billion. They might be a couple of million. Their margins are not that high. And now if now you were hit with the tariffs of 130%, you basically don't have any margin. You're basically already in a loss. You might not have the cash. You might have gone bankrupt already. Even if now it's back to 30, it might be too late for you in a small and mid-sized enterprise. I don't know how many of such companies exist, but there's a possibility that there's enough, not only in toys. I guess there's a number of other factors. Who's paying for all this? Now it's going to be a rush again to book tariffs, to book cargo. You're going to get the higher price of logistics. Tariffs, by the way, you just said, clearly the customer pays for the tariffs. Is not somebody else. You end up paying more. Hence, you buy less stuff because you have less money. So how is this? Does this all play into a recession? Do you see any risks that are now aggravated or not so much?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the macroeconomics, I'm reading the same news as you, right? And so the signals is that's the path, right? You hear agencies saying that we're potentially looking at signals at a global recession, let alone one in the US. But again, I think increased pricing going into the holiday season on things people buy for the holidays is going to make it challenging, right? Yeah, to me, I would definitely be concerned about it, because then you also get like this, vicious cycle versus the virtuous cycle, right? Like you're already seeing kind of consumer sentiments coming down, right? Because of all this noise in the news. But again, it whips back and forth so quickly. I bet you if you survey people this week now with the new news about the tariffs being reduced on China, you might get a whole different perspective. But if you would have asked me last week, I would say we're on the way to a recession. Now you have this news yesterday. Maybe there's a way out of it, right?
The landing.
So that's the world we live in now. You have to be careful what you say, or you have to timestamp it. I made this comment on
exactly.
Just in case someone's like, see what he said.
The world has changed in the last 24 hours. No, that's fair. And I guess to your point, and then to leave this thought with our listeners, but take it as an opportunity because we do have short memory and companies do have short memories, take it as an opportunity to really build a long-term resilient supply chain, to really double source, triple source, multi-source, to really have the fundamentals right, as opposed to what's the cheapest cost possible that I can get things at, and then you end up buying from the same vendor that is, by the way, all in the same place in whatever location it is. And then if it is impacted, then you are going to get impacted. Brian, it's been a great conversation. Thanks for sharing. Good luck with all the work with the clients. I know you're going to be working non-stop, I think, for the foreseeable future, because disruptions will continue. So hang in there.
Thanks, Radu. Yeah, it has been a pleasure, and yeah, we'll see how these comments kind of play out over time. We'll see what 6 months.
Exactly.
We listen to it.
Thanks, Brian. Take care.
Once again, this is Radu Palamariu. Thank you so much for listening to this Leaders in Supply Chain podcast episode. If you're listening it on iTunes, Spotify, or any other channel, we'd love if you leave us a review. And of course, share this with anyone you think might enjoy it. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.